You're all very welcome. There we are. Okay. Okay. Lovely. Okay, so welcome everybody. It's lovely to see as many of you joining online. Thank you for joining this next session with the In Conversation series. Whether you're tuning in as a nonprofit or indeed you're just curious about how we create real change, today we're diving into a topic that's really critical for our sector, which is that of innovation. This is the start. When I set this sort of series up, I was hoping this would become something uh, that was born of my own love of giving back. There's been lots of books and ideas that have shaped my thinking, and there's been countless conversations that I've had with people in terms of their particular pieces of work. And it's been really exciting to then sort of reach out to them and actually start having conversations with them one on one. And I thought, well, why not share that more widely? So as it sparks more conversation with the broader sector here in Australia and beyond. I know that we've got some people from the UK, from the US, Canada, and New Zealand joining us. So you're all very, very welcome as well. I'd like to sort of acknowledge the countries that we're all meeting on as well too. Please share that in your chat. I'm joining you from the Turrbal and Noguera lands here in Mianj and Brisbane as well. I recognise that these lands were never ceded and always were and always will be Aboriginal lands as well. And I recognise any elders past, present and remaining and future, sorry, and any that are joining the call as well too. I'm hoping that you walk away with these sessions with some fresh insights. It may be that you're looking for, or you're a nonprofit leader seeking fresh ideas around things. It could be that it's not always about the theories and the numbers, although I will be referring to quite a lot of research when we go through this particular area as well. But a quick disclaimer. This is an independent space. It's not affiliated with any organization. It's just me in my home doing this. I often think that that can sort of mean that you can have a deeper dive into conversations and really sort of uncover some particular learnings or reflections that people have as well, and think a bit more critically as well. But of course, that's not to blame anything or any misdoings or drag people through the mud or organizations. But fair warning, it can sometimes get a bit colorful in terms of things as well. But if that's not your thing, feel completely free to log off now. No hard feelings at all. But I appreciate you hearing me out. So often innovation, and Pips is here as well, of course, in the background, so you might hear her at some stage. Often innovation gets painted as something that's reserved for tech startups or corporations, but in truth, it's just as vital, and if not more so for our sector, to think about our social impact organizations, because often when we're at that intersection of wicked problems where resources are scarce or communities are depending on us, the challenges are complex, we can't afford not to innovate. But before we dive in, I also wanted to sort of think about how we'll be framing innovation today, as all too often the word innovation might sort of take a meaning that it's a miraculous flash of brilliance that is something that's going to change everything. But in reality, it is much more iterative, and it's about linking discovery to small experiments. And there's a lot of research that has reminded us that innovation as well too is not just about the tools that we use, but also about the people and the culture that surround them. Organizations that have been seen to take a concerted effort around psychological safety or create porous boundaries for ideas are the ones that will thrive when it comes to innovation. So innovation really thrives when people have the permission to test, to fail, and to try again. And that's something we're going to delve into because there's been a recent Australian research, and I think Sarah Richardson, you're on the call as well. Welcome, welcome. But there's been recent Australian research that's actually highlighted this in terms of the board structure and strategic involvement and workplaces. I will be putting links to all of these things in the follow-up email beyond the session with the link as we're recording this, as you can see as well. But I'm delighted to be joined by a person that knows an awful lot more on this subject than I, and who has actually produced and written the book Innovation for Social Change. And that's Leah Kral, who you can probably see on the screen, hopefully at this stage as well. And welcome, Leah. Nice to see you.
Hi, David. It's great to be here. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
It's really great to have you. Leah works with many nonprofits that's to help embrace that curiosity, the collaboration, the creativity, so they can break through barriers and bring bold ideas to life. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us, Leah. I will include your bio and your link to your website, but I think as often with these conversations, there's going to be lots of questions at the end as well too for you. So maybe if we just kick us off, your book makes a clear case that innovation isn't just a nice to have, that it's something in a nonprofit world that is actually essential. Why do you think so many organizations still see it as something optional or even risky instead of something that is more meaningful and core to its mission?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Yeah, I think you hinted at it already a little bit that, when people hear that word innovation, I think their mind just goes right off to the business world or the tech world or, cool innovations we all love, like the iPad, or like now you go to the dentist office, right? And they're printing out using a 3D printer to print out your crown right there on the spot. Those are great, right? And we love those things, but we also have innovation all the time in the nonprofit sector as well. We may or may not give ourselves credit for that. But I think of innovation just simply as finding new and better ways of doing things or new and better ways of adding value. And it can be big or small. So examples of big innovations on our sector might be the American Civil Rights Movement. They were highly innovative in how they achieved, nationwide policy change, or the types of things that the X Prize Foundation works on, like with a national or international scope, like the global water crisis. Those are big, big innovations. But it might mean inventing something. I have stories of that as well, but it can also be something really small and humble, like a simple process improvement where maybe you've automated something or shaved, 5 minutes off a process, and now you can apply those resources, your time and money to better use elsewhere. Right? That's innovation too. So yeah, those things, it's really not optional, right? I mean, to just be comfortable in the status quo, or, if the definition, or if you're comfortable with my definition of just finding new and better ways of doing things, of course we should be doing that, right? And I think, the people we're serving and our missions, are counting on us. And, the stakes are really high in our sector. I've seen situations myself where we've given mediocre services to an at-risk young person, right? It's unacceptable. So we really need to be good stewards of the resources that our donors have carefully entrusted us with. So absolutely, like we can't not be innovative. That's my belief.
Mm. It's helpful. It connects with some of the sort of findings of research and even just practice that's happened in nonprofits that I've worked at as well. But it's showing that public sector innovation is really adaptation or reinvention, and it's not radical novelty, which brings us into that sort of cultural space. A lot of the emphasis, or there's been an emphasis around that innovation outcomes depend heavily on the people and the culture. And indeed, the whole idea of staff being empowered to try, test, learn, it's something I try to bring into how I'm managing teams myself as well. But can you speak to some of the examples that were in your book around how leaders create that environment where staff feel it safe to experiment and contribute ideas, and where you've seen that really work? Have you particular examples where the frontline staff have driven meaningful innovation?
Yeah, I'd love that question. To me, I'm a systems thinker, and I suspect you are as well. I'll get to your answer kind of your question in a roundabout way, but yeah, when I finished the first draft of my book, and there are about 13 chapters, and I was really approaching it with the systems thinking mindset of what are all the things that kind of need to be in place to create that culture of innovation. And so I came up with 6 principles that I think sort of all work together. And I'll describe those really quickly, but the first is to be like a
Please do.
detective.
Please do.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so to me, the first principle would be to be sort of like a detective and be a fearless problem solver. To go about uncovering hidden needs, that we shouldn't just accept how things are. We should have kind of an attitude where we're challenging the status quo. And an example of that might be consider how in developing countries where women's agricultural work is often invisible, but nonprofits have created pro bono legal clinics, which have helped 9,000 women secure land rights to the land on which they work. So to me, that's a great example, right, of challenging our hidden assumptions and asking questions that can help us discover breakthroughs. The second is I call it start small but dream big. And one thing that I think is really encouraging for us is did a lot of research and kind of looked at the origin stories of all these huge nonprofits we're all familiar with today, like the Mayo Clinic, or Alcoholics Anonymous or Habitat for Humanity. All of them started very small, very humble, just a handful of founders or volunteers with no budget to speak of. So to me, that's so encouraging that we can start small and dream big, and a lack of resources is not necessarily an obstacle to innovating or achieving impact. And that's really encouraging to me, because often you kind of hear that as an obstacle, or people, have this mental kind of block that, well, I can't innovate, right? We don't have the resources to do that. The third is that when people on the front lines are empowered to speak up and collaborate, breakthroughs will happen. I've got a story in my book of the night staff at Mayo Clinic finding ways for patients to get a better night's sleep. They were fully empowered to do that, and the story's really great. The fourth is leave room for you mentioned experiments earlier. So leave room for experiments, play, risk taking, and even that big scary word failure. If you just think about the word trial and error is going to be part of it, right? So we have to kind of build in some expectation and tolerance for risk and failure as we try to discover breakthroughs. The fifth is to embrace continuous learning by asking ourselves really hard questions. I share a story in the book from a youth foster care nonprofit called LifeWorks, that began asking themselves, they were doing okay, but they just weren't happy enough, right? They weren't complacent, even though they were having a good impact, but they started asking themselves hard questions and transformed their services to do even better. And then the sixth is to persuade, and I know this is your wheelhouse, but we have to be really good at this, right? As I was researching the book, I remember some moments just laughing out loud when I ran across stories of Mother Teresa being told no, right, and having doors closed in her face. And we have to be persuasive. We're going to have to be ready, have thick skins and be ready to be told no. But even the most successful social entrepreneurs, right, have had to handle that and field tough questions from skeptics, brace themselves for an answer, right? So we have to be good at, convincing people that our good idea is a great idea. So to me, to answer your question, right, it's kind of all those six things working together that then create that culture. You might be good at five of them, but not so great at the sixth. And I think that's really going to get in the way. I think I would argue that we need all of those things.
Yeah, I love that. It's a real kaleidoscope that's there because it's one of the main things that we've got to live and breathe and do. And yes, persuasion is definitely in my wheelhouse. I mean, I think it was a couple of years ago that we had our first conversation when the book came out about it would be lovely to do a series on this at some stage. And then here we are a couple of years and COVID later, kind of thing, able to do it. So we'll get there in the end, but it's all of those things. But I think, rejection's known to the sector an awful lot, but I think it comes back to that cultural aspect because even when culture supports ideas, governance and leadership determine whether they can stick or stall really, as well. Which sort of brings in some of the research that I've shared that paper with you, but the governance and leadership aspect now, even myself, when I sit in an executive role, I see a board that has a risk appetite that's, kind of thing, when it comes to certain discussions around things. But one of the recent works here in Australia has highlighted that boards shape innovation through their structures, through their strategy, and the risk appetite, as well. Something that I'm coming to know only too well, not only in my board role, but in the day job as well. But in your experience, how can boards and executives model the curiosity and openness that makes innovation sustainable in an organization? And have you
Yeah,
seen that in
yeah.
practice?
Yes, yeah, and yeah, I've seen it myself in my own experience, and I have a story that I think illustrates it so well. So I'll lead with a story, and I think this will kind of get at what you're asking. But you mentioned experimentation earlier, and how experimentation comes with sort of risk and failure. So a brilliant story that I love is World Reader, which is a nonprofit that has a mission to bring digital books to disadvantaged children and their families. And when World Reader launched in 2010, they started several experiments at the same time. So in one experiment, they gave these Amazon Kindle e-reader machines or tablets to elementary students in Ghana, and they were really jazzed. They thought this looks good. We think this is going to work. But what they discovered through the experiment was that when the children would go out and play during recess, the tablets would break. So they weren't expecting that. But at the same time, their team was experimenting with a mobile app, which they learned through the experiment that the young users actually much preferred. They weren't expecting it, but that's what they learned. And so today, almost 200,000 users a month are reading on that mobile platform. So I think there's a number of great lessons in that story, right? They spread their bets. If World Reader would have gone all in on that Kindle e-reader machine that they were so excited about, right, they never would have discovered the far better solution with the mobile app. So to me, you were hinting at this earlier, but it's far better to fail fast and fail small before investing too big. It is not a waste of our resources, right? It's actually good use of our resources, and save them money in the long run. And so experimentation like that can help us learn and innovate. So World Readers leadership and board obviously, right, encouraged an innovation mindset and what I'll call intelligent failure. And so some other examples of boards that I've seen, the Hewlett Foundation offers a prize. I love this. They offer a prize to their grants officers and encourages them to share what they call the worst grant from which you learn the most. So they do this sort of internally, right? They bring their staff together. I think they offer a silly door prize, and it's just very human. And they laugh at themselves a little bit, but the point is to learn, right? And to not sort of brush their failures under the rug, right? But to talk about them. And then one of my own nonprofit clients has an excellent board, and this may be rare, but I like to brag on them. So the board actually encourages the nonprofit to take risks and experiment, and they tell them it's okay to fail as long as they're learning those intelligent failures. And then based on what they learn, right, they start to get clarity about what works. And there's this culture, like everyone on staff knows when it's time to get ready for the annual board meeting and wrap up the results and present the report, that if we give the board an annual report that's all glossy and everything's fabulous and great, everyone's going to be in a lot of trouble, and that we know that, right? There's that brilliant expectation, and to me that's the right way to do it. But I'll be frank, you don't see that much, and I think we need to see a lot more of that. And last thing I'll say, just your question's great about the culture of the board. And so I think book clubs, right, can be really great, to find good books that the board can maybe read and discuss together and do some team building. I'll shamelessly promote my own book, but there's some other really good ones out there. I bet you've read a number of them, but Adam Grant's Think Again is fantastic. There's a book called A More Beautiful Question. Another one with a similar title called Questions Are the Answers. They're all like, I bet you have them on your shelf, but they're all,
I
sort
don't
of
have the more
really.
beautiful question one, so I'm sitting trying to write that down. And of course, I've nothing to bloody write on. If I'm writing this. I'm sorry, Sarah Richardson.
Um,
I'm using your paper to write that one down. Sorry. More beautiful. What was it? More beautiful question?
yeah, A More Beautiful Question. It just got re-released. I think it's 10th anniversary edition. It's great. And then Questions Are the Answer by Hal Gregerson and Adam
Lovely.
Grant's Think Again are
Adam
all
Grant, yes,
just
that's on the shelf.
just great.
It sure is. Yeah, one of the organizations I worked with, we had that permission to try test learn, and my manager at the time, who was head of strategy and philanthropy, she's now CEO of a charity here. But one of the phrases that she introduced to me was the learning, the failure in learning, and it stuck with me because
Okay.
we used to build that into our KPIs for our teams in terms of what was your learning moment, and have those reflections. Now it was a bit niche, and people sort of felt a bit like a bit of an idiot like coming on to say this, but when they started to flex that muscle about talking to their failure and their learning at the same time, it really opened up good feedback and good conversations because, of course, this was us trying to be a learning organization. It's a huge national charity, the Smith family, but they also had innovation hubs within the areas of it, which was great as a national manager. Then I could throw problems in that we had hit within in that space. It was corporate fundraising, but where we had a challenge of like, how do we engage our corporate volunteers more? What do we need to do with this? The Spark Innovation Hub, and we actually had an innovation coach on payroll, which was even better. This is where this organization gives so permission into this. you would have thrown that into the Spark Hub, which then other staff from all across the organization, whether they were frontline, whether they were wherever, um, they were um, they were able to frame that in their learning and development. So you had a programs officer, you maybe had a parent, family support worker looking at a corporate fundraising issue, all in that same room, and then going through a sprint process to come out with outcomes, test them, and interview stakeholders externally to the organization to say, hey, I'm part of a Spark Innovation Hub. We're trying a new idea. Why would you think this would work? Why wouldn't? And then take the reflections back to their own line manager and their other part of their business to actually reflect around it. To me, that was innovation in the fabric and ideation in the fabric of an organization that I haven't seen the like of it ever again, to be honest. I haven't heard other organizations doing it, but I think it's a real spotlight to sort of put onto that because it was a really cool way of working and thinking about problems as well. So, I think that came from the top, our executive team that then, sort of give us that blessing to be able to step into that space. Now, governance is one side, but when we talk about funders, because there is a way, and Nesta, gosh, you were at Nesta, Catherine. Yeah, I remember doing some stuff with Nesta in 2007, as well. That's a really good example as well too. But when we talk about funders, this is often where many can hit a bit of a brick wall. One of the tensions that the whole space around nonprofits often face pressure from funders to demonstrate something that's new, something that's novel and new, and is this innovative? And sometimes even in funding applications, we still see that question around what makes this different to your day services. But yet we know whenever we're actually doing something that, the paradox that's here is that we unintentionally devalue things that actually work in the community, and we need to scale that. So almost the trial is there in the actual doing of what requires a long-term investment, and sometimes that gets misaligned. It's a reoccurring challenge that funders can often demand that we are innovative as a nonprofit, but in practice, organizations might just be trying to sustain the proven and what's been effective in that community at that time. So in all of your sort of work and your conversations across the sort of sector as well too, how have you found nonprofits navigating that tension, and how can we help sort of shift that funder's view or mindset to value scaling that works, just as much as it's about something that's new kind of thing, and not always that case.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of tension. Yeah, I think that foundations and nonprofits kind of approach innovation from different vantage points. Like I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, like I'm not a fundraiser, right? I'm used to working on the program side of things, but I see foundations that may look at problems from a higher vantage point. They may be focusing on systems change or building ecosystems and reducing redundancies or silos across the sector. And I think they're often asking, how can this idea scale? Because they have that vantage point, right? And then you've got nonprofits that are often, embedded on those front lines and bringing deep lived knowledge of the communities that they're serving. And so their innovation often comes from practical experimentation and insight into what actually works on the ground. And to me, both of those vantage points are essential. And the real magic happens when funders and nonprofits are, communicating well with each other and sharing knowledge. And, because that's really where great learning and discovery and innovation can happen too, when they're, sharing all of that with each other. And so I think, if a funder is risk averse, I think to me, sharing those stories, like what we've been talking about of innovation and risk taking, can be very helpful. I'm kind of just deeply committed to that. I think maybe that's my superpower, why I write my book and why I'm out speaking and just sharing these stories. And I also think it can help to be transparent for us nonprofits to be transparent about what makes our mission so difficult, and bring funders into that conversation and, say, hey, let's figure this out together. Let's not hide what makes this hard. And the reason I say that is a good friend of mine who's a very experienced grant writer once advised that one of the biggest mistakes in grant writing she sees is when we neglect to include anything about the risks or what might cause our efforts to fail or lag. And I'm so glad to see you nodding. I was going to check for confirmation that you agree with that. So avoiding any discussion of risk then makes a proposal look kind of bad. It might make us look naive. Grant makers are going to be skeptical that the program and the proposal have really been sufficiently thought through. And so I have an example I really admire. As I was doing research for the book, I ran across a nonprofit in the US called ROCA, ROCA. And they're a nonprofit that works with at-risk young men in communities in Baltimore and Boston. And those young men have been through pretty tough experiences. They don't trust easily, and sometimes with really good reason. They've suffered trauma and brokenness and abuse. And so I'll just quote from how Roca doesn't hide how hard that work is. So I'll quote from their website. When a young man is experiencing a crisis, we track him down through his friends, call him, show up at his doorstep, and scout the streets until we find him. For example, we made 112 contacts until a young man in Baltimore joined one of our programs. Wow, right? Like, if it takes 100 conversations or calls, that's what Roca does. So the work of trust and healing can begin. And so to me, I think, if we're working in social impact, we know our work is hard. We're often finding a way where there is no way. And so, if you were a foundation and you had that in your grant proposal, I mean, that would turn my head. I would be impressed, just with the fact that they're being so transparent about that. But I see your wheels turning. I don't know if you wanted to comment or share thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's a very true point around the risk side of things as well. But it's such a really great example, and I'm nodding profusely because I remember the example in your book as well too around it. And just how impactful that actually has been for that crew. We found that in some again, did we frame it as innovative? Probably not necessarily, but in Northern Ireland, obviously at the intersection of some of the troubles and cross community exercises we were trying to do, it was often that case of where we could see that fine line of some of the youth workers. Sorry, as a youth worker in some of those areas, you could see that fine line where some young people were on the cusp of joining a terrorist organization, really, at that stage, and you're trying to sort of keep them away from the politic, but actually into the good of community and the good of humanity that's together. And they can see that a Protestant and a Catholic, and from different sides of the tracks, are just humans trying to, do their daily business kind of thing without the influence hanging over them. But some of them, unfortunately, we lost at that stage, that we lost to the broader network of being drawn into that. But it's always heartening when you hear of organizations like that are doing that intersection and doing the hard yards. But then when it comes to a foundation, yes, if I put that in there and told that story, they'd be like, well, that's not sustainable. And you kind of think, well, actually it is, because it's in the fabric of what the organization, or indeed even for some of the youth works that I was involved in way back then, and that we were definitely trying to do as well. But I think it sort of leads back to the nature of innovation itself. Like, much of it can be, some of it can be reinvention, some of it's not rocket science, as you've said. It's that bit of like, it's something simple that can become something else. And
Yes.
then, if we put programs around it. So, I started in programs and services, that and the ideas space of like, think of another way how to do this. Sometimes the easiest approach is the way around it. As much as you can go in with policy and practice, with sitting in a university talking about the legislation for disabled students and employing disabled students in my team on voluntary experience. But yet, all of us, we're trying to come up with the reasons why the person that was short in stature needed to have an alternative desk in for them, kind of thing. And I just share that just because it was a funny story the whole time. And it was the janitor that came along, and we were there doing the whole thing. We need to buy this desk, do this, and this is the legislation, this is why. And I'm standing there with my justice rights hat on, kind of thing, complaining away about it. But the janitor walked past, and the beautiful phrase that is a Belfast tone of a janitor, turned around and said, "Just cut the fucking legs off the desk, David, and that's it." And you were kind of like, "This is it. It's not innovative. Cut the legs off, desks down." And student was happy that that was that. Legislation aside around things, we can make it in our own heads bigger than what it is. But I think the embedding of everything within the social sector for us is at the heart of what we do and how we work. But there has been some research out there that has been discussed around that social innovation or public sector innovation, if it simply borrows from the business models, we risk losing at its core those relationships, the participation, the inclusion within our community. So how can nonprofits, and again, from your experience of talking to many across the world, and even in the Peace Corps, when you first cut into Jamaica and found some of those, experimental questions that were there, how do nonprofits keep the social at the center of innovation, not just the new?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I'll mention another book. Obviously, I'm a reader, and so there's a book called "How Innovation Works" by Matt Ridley, and he's writing to the business world in this book mainly, but he makes the case that the lone inventor or the solitary genius is really a myth. And he's kind of dives into why that is. Journalists and biographers and inventors themselves kind of like to romanticize that idea of the lone, the rugged individualist struggling against the odds. But in reality, innovation is really a team sport and requires a lot of very human collaboration. And he in his book he mentions the example of Thomas Edison and his invention of the light bulb. Well, what most people don't know is that his New Jersey company employed 200 skilled craftsmen and scientists who were collaborating on tens of thousands of experiments, and resulting in hundreds of patents, right? So there's the myth and then there's the reality. So to me, discoveries are far more likely to happen when we're open to the insights of our colleagues and others, and especially if we can listen to what our skeptical colleagues have to say, that can be hard. We're human, and it can be, it's not always easy to collaborate with difficult personalities, and it can be hard when other people aren't swept away by our staggering genius and our great idea. So, having others stress test our ideas may mean that we have to set our egos off to the side a little bit, because innovation is really about finding better ways of doing things and truth seeking. And so, something simple, people could just be mindful of the language that they use, and team leaders can be mindful of the courage that it takes, right, for someone maybe with less power in the organization to come forward. Seniority can be really intimidating, right? So I include some phrases that in my book, like if you're the supervisor, you might say something like, team, here's my perspective on X, but I'm looking for you all to challenge my assumptions. Am I missing any key information? What am I not thinking of? Or something like, I'd rather have this idea crash and burn here with you all than to have it crash and burn with our clients. What risks or problems should we anticipate? What does the group think? Those kinds of things are very easy to do. It doesn't cost a dime. And I try to model this like I'm a fan of innovation. I want to, walk the talk. So when I give webinars, I often encourage the audience, feel free to disagree with me. And for the folks here, right, absolutely. I love for these conversations to be robust, and I admire, heterodox thinking. So by all means, right, feel free to engage with this and disagree. And I recently upgraded my AI from the free version to the paid version, and it's so much smarter. And I love how it's often respectfully disagreeing with me, like, "Oh, Leah, your old version was much better. What are you doing?" I think that's great, right? That kind of, and that's human. So I hope that gets at your question a little bit of, keeping the social at the center. That's how I think about it anyway.
It does, and I think that it's important because even when we think about, sort of community development, as well, like, and sort of assets-based community development, when you're in a community, the it, the provocation cards that you can question people in communities are the things that you're going to get the learning from, in that context. So again, if you're in far remote Queensland here, for example, and you're talking about reading and education for under fives, there's a whole different conversation that all of a sudden comes out of that, going, well, actually, this particular community has high ear infections. So never mind the reading and the writing and the education part. We need to take care of how baby is being looked after from birth because there's a high ear infection population. So it's getting back to that bit of what is the need, and then how do we contribute to that as well. But even to your point around, some of the stress test side of things as well. Can you speak to, I mean, I know we've got more questions and time for questions as well too. So team, get your questions ready. But can you speak to the Miranda Priestley effect? And I love that as a stress test, but can you talk to Miranda Priestley in terms of
Uh,
how she helps innovation as well? Because I think that's a good
created
one.
this. I created this kind of silly, fun facilitation exercise. And the reason I did is, sometimes you have teams that are testy with each other, but I was facilitating for a team. They all loved each other. I mean, it was a team of like 8 people. They liked each other so much. And really, they never wanted to, they were so nervous about hurting someone else's feelings. So I'm like, okay, who would be someone who's very tough and skeptical? And so I was thinking of like, I found some pictures, one of like Ice Cube, with his eyebrow raised. And then there was another one of, the movie The Devil Wears Prada, where Meryl Streep plays the role of Miranda Priestley. And there's a photograph of her kind of like peering over her glasses and looking so skeptical and tough as nails. So I blew up a picture of Miranda Priestley and brought it into the conference room. And the thought exercise was, okay, our team lead over here, Ben, he's going to have to go make a pitch to Miranda Priestley. She's the head of a foundation board. He's going to ask her for $2 million. Just look at her, right? We know she's not going to, this is going to be a tough sell. So, team, we've got to get Ben ready. What are the questions we think Miranda Priestley's going to ask him, right? And and our job here is we've got to get Ben ready for this. So that kind of took the pressure off of the team members asking the tough questions of each other. Now you have a foil, and that allowed everyone to speak more freely. And they still had a lot of fun. There was a lot of laughing, but they came up with a really good list of tough-minded questions that was what we needed. So yeah, I have a number of kind of facilitators exercises like that because that feasibility part, right, is really important, and thinking through feasibility and not having groundless optimism, but asking those tough questions so our board and donors don't have to.
Yeah, it can be often the thing that's what brings people together to work in this sector. But then, as you say, you need that healthy conflict. Like Patri Lencioni talks about this in terms of the pyramid of success around things, the five steps. The pyramid's in my head, but anyway, I don't know whether it's a pyramid as I'm remembering now or not. He looks around for the book. But you need that healthy conflict. But how do you start that healthy conflict if everyone's just feeling a boundary there in some way? So it's back to that porous boundary of saying, I'm trying to encourage you out of this. I see my teams as councils. I mean, there's an expectation that you have all the answers when we really don't at all, kind of thing. But you have the answer in terms of the teams that you've employed and brought around you, or volunteers that you've brought into that space as well. But they're your council, right? So every one of them has a real space that I want to encourage them to have agency, or budget, in some ways, to go, well, what's it going to cost? What's the learnings from it, and frame it in that way so that they can take away, play with it, come back and go, actually, look, this didn't work. It's taken us down a different trajectory. Okay, but what did you learn about it? Like, what did you learn in that context? Rather than thinking, well, that's a waste of money, or indeed thinking, oh, we've wasted charitable funds doing this. It's getting out of that headset, because and actually into something that goes, but for the greater good, we need to test something different, or we need to test a different way, or we've heard from the community that they've expressed, like the ear infection side of things, that to get kids engaged in reading at that stage, we hadn't even thought of that. So we were like, well, we're going to have to put something in about washing kids' ears into the books whenever they arrive, so that the parent can refer to that and help take care of the ear infection. It's a small bit, but it's back to that listening exercise of hearing from community as well. So often, I mean, there's many different steps, there's many different practices, but what do you think that we need to start doing tomorrow that brings us into that mindset? And if we had our board there, what would Miranda Priestley be asking the board in terms of their appetite for innovation, as well, for those of us that may have boards that are in terms of their risk appetite and the risk appetite statement that
Yeah.
they can't even agree on, for example.
I think an easy place to start. So the way I try to structure my book thinking this way. So the first third of my book takes a team through what I'll call design thinking exercises, and they're not expensive. They're just questions, right, and kind of a framework. So to me, for that question of, what would you advise? Where's the best place to start tomorrow that you would advise to a board or to an executive director? That's what I was trying to do, right, with the book. What are low cost things you can do to get that clarity and to help design pilots and experiments? And so I stole that idea. I'm a big believer in stealing good ideas wherever you see them. So I stole it from Pixar. And so Pixar has won, their movies have won like 23 Academy Awards. There's some of the highest grossing animated films of all time, like Toy Story. So I got curious, what is it that they do, and how are they so great at what they do? And so they use this process called design thinking. And I'll just share my screen if you don't mind here, just to illustrate. Hopefully you can see my screen share here. So there are many versions of design thinking. It's been around for like 40 years, used heavily by marketing firms and creative companies like Pixar. So design thinking is a process for exploring what's possible and thinking creatively and strategically. So this is the Leah version that you're seeing, right? There's many versions. This is the Leah version that you'll see in my book. And I'll just make a quick aside that you can have a lot of pain caused in the nonprofit world from maybe board members coming from the business world who are like, hey, these things work great over here. Let's just take this great process and kind of plunk it on top of our nonprofit. And there can be a lot of pain caused from that. So I'm a big believer in yeah, there are great systems and processes and frameworks from the business world, but we have to translate them very mindfully and very thoughtfully. And so that's what I've done with this. I've tested it out with nonprofits and kind of tweaked it until it makes sense for us. So I think I'll just go through this very, very quickly. But I've got a chapter on each of these in my book and lots of stories that help illustrate the point. But to me, this is an easy, low-cost way, and in a way, it's kind of strategic thinking in disguise, or strategic planning in disguise. This question of what's desirable is asking, well, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And are we good at identifying hidden needs for the people we're serving? And it can be a struggle. I call it the fog of good intentions, right, in the nonprofit world. We're passionate, we care deeply, right? That's not the problem, but it's how do we accomplish what we hope, to accomplish, and do we have clarity around that? And that's so important. So, for example, let's say you're a nonprofit that focuses on workforce development. Well, what aspect of workforce development are you trying to solve? Are you focused on those who are temporarily unemployed, or maybe someone like me, I get laid off, but I have my education and my experience, and I'll probably readily find my way back to work pretty quick. Or are you focused on those who are chronically unemployed or underemployed? Maybe the homeless, right? Or people coming out of rehab. Totally different problem. Do we have clarity around that? This question of what's scalable, it's a chapter I probably rewrote the most and learned so much from, but there's chapter 3 is called Stretching the Imagination, and it shares techniques and real world stories to help nonprofit teams think about how to scale and if they should scale. That was kind of my assumption when I first started, where I thought, oh yeah, that's good. We always want to scale, right? But realized actually you can think of scaling in different ways, and sometimes it's the right strategic choice to be hyper local. But how do you think through all those questions? And the feasibility question we talked about a little bit earlier, but we have limited resources, and we want our resources to be applied to their highest and best use. And even though there's so many endless problems, that we want to focus on, but we can't say yes to all of them, right? We have to narrow and avoid groundless optimism and be realistic, right? And pick our battles. So those other two questions of what's desirable and scalable, when you're taking your team through those, it's kind of sky's the limit, right? Think of your wild ideas, kind of get crazy with your ideas. But at some point, it's really important to have that feasibility question in there too, and stress test our thinking. And then finally, based on those 3 thinking exercises, then we get to the action part where we say, okay, based on our thinking, maybe we have a hypothesis that we want to test. So now we're going to test it, right? Like the world reader example. And so when I ask, I'll be out speaking with nonprofit audiences, and I'll ask them, what do you think nonprofit experiments look like? I get kind of, confused looks. I think people think of science labs and beakers, but we actually do a lot of experimentation in the nonprofit world. So I've got a whole chapter on that. So to me, all of these are important, and that gets to your question of what are low-cost ways, what's a good place to start? To me, it's just this kind of, thinking and using frameworks like this that can be so helpful. And I think it's the very important work that's upstream of fundraising and marketing. So I'm going to stop sharing now, but yeah, that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
I love it. I love it, and I think we see that through the Stanford design side of things as well. That when you step through it, when we're thinking of new programs or services in the nonprofit sector as well, and then a couple of years ago, in study, disruptive innovation came into it and applying the six lenses of disruption. So just the whole idea of oppositional thinking and bringing that in terms of, well, what if Amazon ran our nonprofit? What would that look like in terms of things? And it almost was timely in the sense of when we moved into the pandemic, the organization that I was working for, that was at the time, a lot of our services were frontline. Within 6 weeks, we had to think completely different, as everybody else did at that stage. But you just had to draw everything in to go, how are we going to deliver and continue to support our beneficiaries in a way that is effective and adaptive for now? And I think having the innovative fabric that was there enabled the organization to do it quicker than they would have anticipated, without sort of dropping that service and provision as well. But Leah, look, you've worked with so many different organizations. Is there a story that really stands out to you, where innovation really transformed an organization's impact? Oh, actually, before I ask that question, just when you're talking about the feasibility as well, the other thing that I wanted to sort of highlight was the article. I don't know if you read it many years ago, but there was a Stanford social innovation review thing that was out. It was called "What's Your End Game?" and it spoke about exactly that. It went from that questioning around what's feasible, desirable, and viable, right into well, when we scale this, should we be scaling this? And it was around the time whenever collective impact was becoming a thing, in terms of a model that's gone on to be 11, 12 years in practice. But one of the things I remember from that article was that whole bit of that question that makes you stop going, should we scale though? Should we be here as a nonprofit? We're here because of the mainstream not being accessible in some ways, but it was then making you think of those lenses of it. Do we want replication? Do we want to open source this tool? Do we want to make sure that the communities are able to, sort of stand alone without us being there? And it was just an interesting concept. So again, there'll be another one to stick in the library, but I'll include that in the link in the email on the way out. But it's still always stuck with me, where what's their end game? Like, what are we doing here in this particular space? And it's helped me then, even in the day job now, when I was work with researchers who are coming up with just discoveries upon discoveries, that you're kind of going, but what's the end game here? Where are we going with this? In 10 years, what will this look like? So it's helped me build out some program logic with them in terms of what their research is in ovarian cancer and how that can be articulated then. And because of course it's something that's completely unknown at this stage, which is a whole persuasion tool in itself when it comes to speaking to donors or other partners as well. But is there so that was the side that was leading me into that sort of question about you having worked with so many organizations across the board, but so that one story that really stands out, that you saw innovation really transformed an organization's impact, where they even just took it in a different direction.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this one story as a nonprofit prep school in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey, and it just their story blew me away. And this kind of happened over decades. But I loved it so much I made it the opening chapter of my book because it was just so good. And to me, their story illustrated all the points I wanted to make throughout the rest of the book. But the name of it is St. Benedict's Prep School. And when you hear what they're doing, I mean, it almost sounds too good to be true, but it's a 100-year-old private school that was literally forced to close their doors in the late 1960s. So there were race riots happening in our country, right? And pretty bad in Newark, New Jersey. There were, fires and buildings razed, and the whole community just changed, right? So the community that St. Benedict's Prep was serving were mostly like white Irish suburban Irish American families, right, who could afford to pay tuition, and middle class. And so after the violence of the race riots, and there was what they call white flight, the whole demographics of the neighborhood changed. Many businesses closed, the school itself closed, and so they thought they might close permanently because of the change, and their tuition sources were gone now. But a few of the school leaders stayed. They felt really committed to the community. They refused to walk away. And so I think they closed, it might have been about a year or partial year that they had to close and rethink their model. And they reopened with a new model of serving the at-risk young men in their community, which is now like a fragile, marginalized community that they were serving. And they had to figure out, how are we going to raise money? Our tuition situation's no longer the same. And yet they created one innovation after another over the years. and discovered a way to flip the script and how they operated. They actually said, what if we let the students run the school? And if you can believe that, like it's incredible. And they found a way to do that, right? So the students actually are running the place. They're making real decisions. They have these kind of cohorts where they're watching out for each other, small groups, taking real responsibility and getting extra help for the students who are falling behind. They have these morning convocations where they chant these affirmations like "whatever hurts my brother hurts me," and oh, it's just moving and it's for real. And it's intense. We're talking about an 11-month school year. New students go through what's essentially a type of boot camp. And every first year student has to complete this challenge. They go as a group and they have this challenging hike on the Appalachian Trail that's pretty intense. It's kind of a rite of passage and it's a no man left behind sort of thing. And all this that they're doing, and there's lots more. The whole chapter tells more about it, but it's working. And so as far as the stats, 98% of those at-risk young students go to college, and not just go to college, but 80% actually complete college. And if you compare that to the stats of the community where they live, half the families in Newark are living in poverty, and only 12% of the adults there have college degrees. So, whoa, right? Like that's transformative. And so, that was a teaser, right? You can read a lot more about them. They've been on 60 Minutes, right? They're amazing. So, that's what comes to my mind of
Yeah,
an
that's a
example.
really
They're
great
just
example.
doing everything right.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that the students get to take over the school. I think that's a really great example as well. Okay, so we're going to throw out to the group if there's any questions coming through. Now, of course, Zoom did that thing where they changed everything in my upgrade, so I'm not sure if people are on that can say it says allow them to speak. I don't know what I'm doing right or wrong here. So, no, hang on. It says allowed to talk. Oh, allowed to talk. Allowed to talk. Allowed to talk. Oh, I'm taking you all off mute. Look at that. Allowed to talk. Allowed to talk. Please fire. Oh, asked to unmute. Asked to unmute. Allowed to talk. Allowed to talk. Okay, there you go. Everybody's in the group. If there are any questions that anyone has, please feel free to take your camera off and ask Leah a question, or indeed even myself, but more Leah as well. If there's nothing coming up for anyone, what do we say? Hang on, have I done that right? Look, I think I have. Or you can pop it into the chat as well. There's a lot of examples, and look, we're pulling out so many reading opportunities right now as well. This is not helping with my bookcase balance either, Leah. There's other articles that people are tagging in here as well. I might know when Aaron would be tagging it as well. Thanks for you too on my WhatsApp channel, by the way. Bleeping it off. I just had to mute it at that stage as well. So there's a lot of things that are actually in the book. If there's lessons that you really carry forward, it's how you create that culture of curiosity and trust and the safety of ideas that will come. I think that's something that I really took away from the first read and then the second read now. At the weekend, as you've seen, was something to actually look at as well. Catherine, you've got a question, has raised your
Yeah.
hand.
Hello. I don't know how
Hi,
my cam.
Catherine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. I'm not sure if
Welcome.
my camera is. Oh, sorry. My dogs, of course, bark as soon as I speak. Yeah, I'm not sure if my camera is on or not. I can't see
It's
it.
not, it's just your lovely name, Catherine, but I have your
Okay.
picture in my head anyway
Okay.
from Fundraising Appreciation
Yes.
Day. So far away. Lovely to hear
Um,
you.
I think I'm just curious to know what Leah, for example, would suggest. So my organization currently, we we're sort of at a crossroads of being trying to be commercial. We're not for profit, but we're trying to be commercial or commercialize a product. But we're also trying to lean into the philanthropic grant side of things. So they're at odds because you're trying to appeal to commercial organizations to partner with you, but you're also trying to appeal to philanthropic bodies. So that is one challenge within itself. But we're also not great at demonstrating our impact. A lot of people in my organization sing our own praises because we believe in the work that we do, but a lot of people in my organization don't come from a social innovation background like I do. So it's very hard to explain to them that case studies and demonstrating impact goes beyond just the nice words we say about ourselves. So what sort of recommendations would you have in a very quick fire sort of way at being able to instill that message into the wider organization? Or are there any sort of specific tools that you sort of have available that you could pass to an organization to say, like, you know, flying the flag for demonstrating impact and case studies?
Yeah, those are two really great questions. I wish we had like 20 minutes and we only have maybe three
I
or
know that's an
four.
essay
Yes.
question in itself, right?
But I love your question. Just a couple different things come to my mind. I'll get to the demonstrating impact one first. So we didn't have time to cover it, but I have a whole chapter in my book on metrics and how metrics can help or hinder innovation, and it incorporates like storytelling as well. So I think that chapter would be really helpful in what you're asking there. And I don't shy away from where metrics can go wrong. There's a really great book I recommend to everyone called The Tyranny of Metrics. It's about a 4-hour read, and he very creatively kind of walks you through all of the things we do not want to do with metrics. And then so I agree with him, and then I pick up where he leaves off because he never really gets to, well, what should metrics be? What should they do for us? That might be helpful. And I'm so sorry we don't have more time, or I'd go more into
Yeah.
that. And then your other question about being at the crossroads, I think that's super interesting, and it could be really innovative what you're thinking about doing with the, facing the decisions of, do we have this commercial product, or, we've got different avenues, right, that we can achieve the impact or our mission. And I'm seeing a lot more of that. And I think maybe it's a good thing. So there's income generation projects. I saw a lot of hybrid nonprofits that are kind of doing all of those things.
Mhm.
Like Goodwill Industries in the United States Cleveland Clinic might be another kind of similar example. Well-known nonprofit hospital in the US, kind of up there with Mayo Clinic.
Yeah.
So they're doing kind of all these things, right? So they get government grants. They're a nonprofit hospital. And then they do these spin-off patents, right, when they discover something that works. So they're kind of all three, right? They're a mix of government, for-profit, and nonprofit, and how they
Mhm.
operate. And there's many other examples like that where it's just kind of a legal definition, right? But you're very creatively going about what you need to do to solve or work towards your mission,
Yeah.
which I think is really good. Seeing a lot of cross-sector collaboration as well, because poverty and social problems are complex. Like the problem of overfishing. Again, right? That's a very complex problem. You're going to need all three sectors. So
Yeah.
I wish we had more time and that you could share more
Yeah.
about your situation, but I'm intrigued that your organization is like looking at all the options. And I think that's a really good thing. And like here in the US, where we're having these federal funding freezes, a lot of nonprofits are being forced to think hard about income
Yeah.
generation, just like you all are. So I think that's a great question.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
There's loads in that, Catherine, as well. Like even just in terms of what the theory of change is around the organization and how
Yeah.
that supports the storytelling aspect, because like that can help when you have that and you have your mail framework that's going to around it. It can often help you point to the gaps in some ways that then people
Yeah.
will start to go, okay, so we're missing parts of this jigsaw and in some ways. But you're right, there's maybe that's a future episode to actually sort of
Yes.
pull out a bit more around it, so as that we
Yeah,
are
bring me
metrics.
back. Bring me back.
It's
And
definitely, I think that's
let's
another
talk about
conversation.
metrics.
And talk about metrics, because it's on everyone's lips. And even yeah, there's been a lot of conversation around, are we measuring the right things for the right
Yeah.
reasons as
Yeah.
well, and not going mad around it. I think Julia Gillard called it the metrics mania that's out there at the leadership summit here not that long ago. But
Mhm.
yeah, there's lots in it. So there is another book, Beyond Measure, which is on my shelf, and I've sort of reached out to the author of it. because it's measurements around everything, but it's more to do with like, why do we measure things? It's just quite an interesting geek out session, really. But anyway, look,
Nice.
we're getting close to our cutoff time at this stage. I'm just going to check the chat if there's any other questions in there. But Aaron, thank you, Aaron. You've shared the book link there as well to the tyranny of metrics as well too, which is this is going to be terrible for my bookcase. I'm never going to get bloody the other book that I need to read for the next episode read if I keep getting all of these new ideas. But I guess my holiday at the end of the year will be stacked full of things to get through as well. Leah, it's been such a rich conversation. I really, really want to thank you for sharing your insights and sharing your stories, and also some of those practical tips and advice as well too. It's been such a pleasure to have you talk about mindset, culture, and courage to experiment, and hear those words and examples that you have, of which you've touched on some of the examples in the book, but there is a plethora of more and more and more in there as well. I love the one about the prison that's there, that the coalition that came together around that. There's just some really great examples in there. To everyone else listening, thank you for joining us. I'll be sharing an evaluation link after today's session. So please, I'd love to hear your thoughts back, as it helps me sort of shape what this might look like for the future as well. You'll get that link. You'll get the link to the recording. You'll get the link to a lot of these resources and books that are there, hopefully, if I've captured them all as well. But Leah, again, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. We finally got there after the initial chat all those years ago, but and thank you so much for bringing this book into the world and keeping the conversation going as well. I love your energy,
Excellent.
and I look forward to seeing you again. And we'll have to get you back. There's going to be a get together of like Lisa Sargent talking about the value of gratitude, and then you talking about the impact of that and how we measure it. There's going to be so much stuff to get into in future episodes, and I look forward to having you as part of that journey. But from my home to yours, thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
I loved it. Take care. Take care, everybody else. Have a great start to your day and into the weekend as well. Lots of love. All the best. Bye. Hey.